One, two. Okay. Welcome everybody. I hope you found a seat. Okay. If you've not subscribed to Patreon with the People's Assembly, please do. These things, events cost money, and we've got to fund the struggle. We've got to fund the fight. But welcome everyone. We'll just give it another minute or so everybody gets sat down. And we'll then start.
Yeah, the microphones I haven't heard of. Yeah, they've got lost the mic now. It's like stand basis, so we can't put out any more light again.
Okay. Okay. Shall we sing some songs? Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. How's the mic? Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Okay, we got sound. We got sound. We got sound on the live streams. No, we haven't. Oh, goodness me. Still no sound? Mic check, mic check. What's going on? Do we have sound? We've obviously got it in this room, but we're trying to get this out and obviously building our own media. Do we have sound yet? No. Oh, goodness me. Shall we just go without the sound? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's really good to see you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Kebede. I am the president of the National Education Union, and we have sound. Fantastic. Really important discussion between Jeremy and Gary there. I hope some of you are able to see that, and it's not an entirely new audience, but this evening's session is about building our own media, essentially. Communication. 5 years later, this statement does really continue to ring true. Now, we've got the green shoots of growth, haven't we, of independent media. Jeremy mentioned Double Down News, Novara, We Own It, Media Reform Coalition, Hacked Off, and in leading actors and journalists, they're fighting for change in the media. Now, today, we're going to talk about some of the people leading the fight for change and announce a new initiative. So without further ado, let's go through some of our panel. We've got fantastic Maxine Peake. We have Emma Jones from Hacked Off. From We Own It, we have John Bosco. And of course, Gary Younge. And the one and only Jeremy Corbyn. Now, obviously, today we are talking about the media, what's wrong with it and how we can change it. But on this note, Peace and Justice do have a big announcement to make. Today, we are launching news clubs for the UK from tomorrow in what we believe will be a huge step in creating a media that works for the many and not the few. The problem we really have with the media is that those who own it, the billionaires, the corporate advertisers and the government decide what we talk about every day. They set the agenda. This means even when we win, we lose. When we win an argument about Meghan Markle or Andrew Neil, all we have achieved is ignoring the climate emergency, poverty, war, inequality, and numerous other problems that we have to solve for yet another day. And usually we've got ourselves raging in the course of it. But that is enough for me. We'll move to our first speaker, who is Emma Jones from Hacked Off.
Hi, thanks for having us. Basically, the press will tell you that they're less powerful today. That's not true. Actually, more people now read newspapers than ever before. They just mostly read them online. News publishers reach 3 in 4 adults every single week. And the same old people are in charge, and the same old people are setting the same agenda. Research that Hacked Off's done shows that newspaper executives meet government ministers as much as every other working day. So, you know, that's the sort of conversations that they're having. That's the sort of relationship that politicians and newspaper executives have. It gives you a little bit of a clue as to what's going on. Now, we can't literally bin billionaire press owners, although given there's only I think 5 of them, they could probably fit in a bin, but we can't literally do that. So there are 4 big things that we can do, and that's what we campaign on. And we think that there's some big issues that we can campaign for. Basically, we need more plurality in the press. We need diversity, regulation, and finally, we need the reinstatement of Leveson Part 2. The public inquiry that was cancelled by the government, the public inquiry that was supposed to investigate the government. The power of the Telegraph, the Mail and the Sun and the Times is concentrated in the hands of 4 white men. Now that can't be right. I've worked for 2 of them, albeit 20 years ago, and since that time, the people at the top of those organisations have remained the same. Nothing changes, and they essentially rule with an iron fist. And they do that for a reason, and that's so that they can stay in that position. So, as I said, we need more rules on plurality so that that doesn't happen, and to reflect the modern age and the people that they're supposed to be talking to, that they're supposed to be reflecting. The same thing goes in terms of newspaper diversity. The picture is very different from the world that the newspapers are meant to report upon. The NCTJ, that's the National Council for the Training of Journalism, recently found that 92% of journalists are white, and 89% of those are degree educated. So that's a very small pool of people, essentially, that are being drawn from. And that hasn't changed again. I would say that's pretty much the same. In fact, it's probably less diverse than when I worked in newsrooms 20 years ago, certainly in terms of class, perhaps not in other ways. Many of the editors and the news desks I worked for were Oxbridge and privately educated. To a certain extent, or to a large extent, that same goes for left-leaning papers such as The Mirror and The Guardian. It's unusual to be different. It's essential that we have reporters and editors from working class and ethnic backgrounds, of course it is, so that they can communicate to everybody in society, in particular the marginalised. The other thing that we crucially need is regulation. It might sound like a bit of a boring subject in a sense, but independent regulation for the press is essential. Almost every other similar industry is regulated. Even broadcast media is regulated. But the newspapers, they think that they're above regulation. A billionaire owner shouldn't be able to get away with publishing falsehoods on climate change, COVID being an exaggerated hoax, if they believe it to be, or disgusting views about women and minority groups, which have absolutely no substance. Last year, Hacked Off found that 50 articles about COVID in the press were false and misleading. We worked with scientists and environmental experts, and we found dozens more inaccurate articles about climate change. An investigation by our campaign also found that inaccurate stories demonising Muslims and immigrants were not just exposing millions of members of the public to hatred, These racist stories were then picked up by white supremacists and circulated as propaganda on their websites, known to be used by violent neo-Nazi terrorists. So what do the corporate press have to say? We can probably guess. They hide behind Ipso, which is a sham organisation. It's a regulator, apparently, designed to give the illusion of accountability, while in fact newspapers from any meaningful form of regulation. Ipso's bad news for the public. In 7 years, Ipso hasn't established a single investigation. In that time, we've seen waves of Islamophobia, anti-migrant hatred, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, fake news, racism. You see it all in the papers, and yet, according to Ipso, none of this merits them using their powers to investigate and redress. Ipso's also bad news for journalists. Journalists would have more protection, in actual fact, with better regulation. Reporters know that politicians shouldn't be anywhere near press regulation. Yet, Lord Foulkes, a former member of the Conservative government, who is still a member of the House of Lords, he runs Ipso. There is an alternative, though. There could be more. I was on the board of Impress, which is the UK's only independent, genuinely independent press regulator. I helped formulate the code there as well, which is designed, if there is an inaccurate story, to be a basis from which we can redress those wrongs. And when we saw wrongdoing amongst our members, that's exactly what we did. We remedied it. And whilst the corporate press has chosen Ipso, more publishers overall are members of Impress. Our members' genuine commitments to press freedom, to quality journalism, and speaking truth to power shame the attitudes of the largest newspapers. The reality is, until all the largest publishers join an independent regulator, journalists, readers, and the wider public will all continue to be let down by them. So lastly, what can we do? What we can do is establish the second part of the Leveson inquiry. Because although we can't bin billionaires, we can put them on the stand and we can hold them to account. And this is how we do it. The promised public inquiry into criminal activity in the press and allegations of corruption between newspapers, the police, and politicians. The inquiry which never happened because the government cancelled it. That's never happened before. A government has never cancelled a public inquiry like that before. We remember Leveson Part 1, which looked at regulation, but we're still waiting for critical answers from Part 2. Why aren't the Met re-investigating Rebecca Brooks and The Sun in the light of a huge number of serious allegations which right now are being looked at in the High Court? 35,000 private investigator payments have been discovered. We've had more evidence of computers being wiped, extraordinary allegations in actual fact of hard drives being destroyed, all to basically protect the bosses at the top of these newspapers, the ones who've been there for so long but just are on more money now. So how many titles were involved in criminal activity, and yet the editors knew nothing? Why did junior journalists take most of the rap for the wrongdoing, and almost all of their senior colleagues never faced accountability or prison? How close were the politicians to the largest newspaper publishers? I think the meetings that I talked about give you a good idea of that as well. Or what about the corrupt relationships between newspapers and the Metropolitan Police? Evidence that illegality spread far beyond what we know about. An inquiry into allegations of political corruption cancelled by politicians themselves. This isn't a line of duty storyline. This is the reality of Leveson Part 2. Hacked Off are proud to be involved in the... we're proud to be part of the Independent Media Association. This is an association of regulated ethical publications. By supporting these publications, you can support a more responsible media. In summary, the critical things that we can do to fix our broken media are greater plurality and newsroom diversity, independent regulator for the largest newspapers, and Leveson Part 2. That's how we can make a change, and that's how we can bring about the kind of media that this country actually deserves. So I hope you'll consider joining our campaign at hackinginquiry.org and following us on Twitter as well, where we're at Hacking Inquiries. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. And make sure you do join that campaign. We need to really build a movement for change. Hold those editors, hold those owners to account, because we know that they're lying to us all. But anyway, over to our next speaker. A big round of applause for Maxine Pink.
Thank you. No, I'm here to learn as much as I am to solve any problems. I can't say I have the answers. But I'm not an academic, I'm not a politician, I'm an actor, a creative. But what I feel on my side of the media, because it's all part of the same sort of pot, isn't it? That again, it's the problem with the gatekeepers. And I think for young people, it's that age-old saying, you can't be what you can't see. And I think there's such a lack still of representation on our TV screens of us seeing shows that reflect back at us as a society. And it's how we tackle that, how we call out the gatekeepers, because it looks maybe on screen that things are happening, but it's always sort of at the lower level. We need the producers, the executive producers, the commissioners, people who are running the BBC. Now, I don't, bite the hand that feeds me, but we have to stop the Tory takeover of the BBC. There's still some great initiatives from the BBC. They still do encourage young writers, young actors in small ways. And if we lose that, then where else is going to do that? Nobody takes risks anymore. The BBC should not work on viewing figures. It's a service. Should be a public service for us all. It shouldn't matter how many people watch it. There should be something for everybody. And as we now know, we've slightly been overtaken by the heritage drama model as all right, Julie. We've got so many dramas about the royal family, so many dramas about our sort of, aristocracy and gentry, and it's how a society is being reflected back at us. What are they telling us with this? What are they saying? Why are they constantly trying to keep us in our place? I don't understand. Well, we do understand why there's a constant outpouring of these sort of heritage royalty dramas. It's the great old Britain of back in the day, but that doesn't represent us. And again, I understand television and film is entertainment, but how do we stop? The only power I have as an actor is to say no to roles. I have little other power, really. You start to realise you're going very naive and green, thinking, I'm going to change the world. Unless you're like Julie Hedge-Mandel and you start a theatre company. You start Take Back Theatre. And I think, for me, it's about teaching young actors. It's actors as activists. When I speak to young actors at drama school, which I think now drama school is maybe the model that needs to be reshaped and re-looked at, 3 years. Who can afford now to train or study anywhere for 3 years? People from backgrounds like us. Who can do that? So I think there's a real, there's got to be a concerted effort of, what is an artist now? You don't just have one discipline. And I speak to young students at drama school and they will say, but we will be the business. When we leave, we're the business. And there's a few times that, I've sort of got, oh, God, they're so naive, it's not going to happen. But actually, that's my ignorance. And I do really believe that the next generation now, they can own it. There's ways of You know, we need a People's Assembly TV channel. We should be making our own dramas, our own comedies. You know, how do we do that? We need to rob a few of those billionaires. I do understand that. So if anybody's got a tank or an armoured car, or there's a little, we can sign up at then. Anyway, I'm wittering on. But just to say, I'm here to learn, and I hope this discussion I can go away feeling inspired, as I know you lot will have some fantastic ideas. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think the People's Assembly have got the tanks hidden somewhere, haven't they? So we can take over the billionaire media. But our next speaker from We Own It, John Bosco.
I was actually hoping you were going to try to say my surname. Hi everyone, I'm John Bosco Wobo. I am campaigns officer at We Own It, and quite the contrary, we're not a media organization. We are not for-profit. We are a non-profit organization that campaigns for public ownership. I thought I'd use the opportunity to sneak that in somewhere in case there are people here who don't know who We Own It is. And we think that there is an important public ownership element to the question of media independence in Britain. Of course, we are extremely lucky, although of course we don't often realize that we have two brilliant, well, for all intents and purposes, brilliant media outlets that are publicly owned, the BBC and Channel 4. And we often criticize them when they do things that we believe are wrong, and when they are biased. And of course, the government also does criticize them, the difference being that they have a lot more power to do something about it, and they tend to do something about it, right? They appoint their friends and donors to very important positions in those organizations who just change it from the inside. I think that from our point of view, who don't have power, let me put it that bluntly, what we need to be thinking about doing is, number one, protecting the BBC and kind of preventing it from going all the way in the direction of privatization. And the risk of that actually happening exists. It's not theoretical. They're trying to privatize Channel 4 right now, right? And I think there is a very good chance we could win that fight. But if we are stuck in that kind of continuum of being opposed to Channel 4 because we saw something in their news coverage of Jeremy Corbyn that we didn't like, kind of allow ourselves to feed into the government's desire to make Channel 4 and the BBC incredibly unpopular so they can kind of sack it from the inside. I think we would be lending our power to something we don't really want to happen. Emma has spoken a great deal about, and very eloquently about, how our media is incredibly stacked against working class people, against people of what I suppose it's not very politic to call it non-white backgrounds, but I'm black, I can say it. People of non-white backgrounds, people that are disabled. And I think, and this is an area that I think we can give Channel 4 a great deal of credit for. It was founded with a remit to give those people a voice, and they do that really well. But broadly speaking, our media terrain is incredibly white, male, and I think somebody called it pale, male, and stale. Yeah, ma'am. Thank you very much. It is very much that. And whenever we gather in meetings like this, I think we spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong with the media. And I mean, I think we all agree on what's wrong with the media. It's become the mouthpiece of those in power. Their education taught them that anything outside of the neoliberal economic consensus is not common sense. It's not serious. So when Jeremy and John McDonnell were speaking about issues that fell outside of those parameters that they were taught to accept, it just didn't compute. They thought they were not serious people. And I imagine that a lot of those people are not bad people. I have had a few journalists that I would call my friends, and they're not bad people, but they have just terrible politics. Right. So from that point of view, I think the elitism of the media is a very important problem. But I don't think we should spend a lot of our time pointing it out. I think that Rashida Tlaib, an American congresswoman, recently said that that there is no karma in politics, just power. And when I was thinking about it, it reminded me of how the media spent 3.5 or 4 years convincing the whole country that one of perhaps the foremost anti-racists in Parliament was a racist, right? And there is no recompense, right? There will never come a time when everybody in this world agrees that Jeremy Corbyn is not a racist, right? Because good doesn't always end up happening unless we fight for it, right? So I think that one of the things I want us to come out of this meeting, one of the things I want us to come out of this meeting with is a resolve not to allow the conservatives and not to allow the people who define themselves as anti-wokeness. The first time I heard the word woke, I thought it was a good thing. I liked it. Now I'm no longer sure I want to call myself woke, because there are a lot of people who think it's an evil thing, right? And but they define themselves based on it, and we cannot allow them to take over the BBC, right? We cannot allow them to take over Channel 4. They're already doing a fairly good job taking over the BBC, but we shouldn't let them do the same for Channel 4. So I think one of the ways that we have been trying to fight back is in our campaign that we've been helping coordinate in collaboration with the 38 Degrees and the Media Reform Coalition, Voice of the Listener and Viewer, the British Broadcasting Challenge. We've been fighting back against the effort to privatize Channel 4. Last month, we managed to organize over 50,000 people to respond to the government's consultation. And of course, there is no guarantee that they'll actually pay attention to what those people say. But at the very least, we've been able to demonstrate that people are paying attention. And I imagine that we're hoping that people were not paying attention so they could sneak those things through. But with that amount of kind of outpouring of feeling that this is a public asset, it speaks for people who normally don't have a voice, we should not allow it to be taken over by a private corporation whose overwhelming preoccupation is how do we squeeze a buck out of this channel. Right, so, of course, we will continue to campaign on that. In mid-November, I cannot give you a specific date now, and I'll invite everyone here, please, to visit weownit.org.uk. Sign up, be on our newsletter list, and you'll get more information about this as it happens. But we do hope that in mid-November, we will be organizing a protest in London to kind of try and highlight some of the great programs that people love and cherish. Something like Google Docs or something like It's a Sin, that we would lose because those programs don't make money. The only reason Channel 4 does them is because they have a duty to kind of enrich our public and social life, right? It didn't make them a dime to air the Paralympics. Every other channel refused to do it because it would not make them any money, because part of the condition was you cannot run ads on this thing. And they took it, they ran it because they don't have to make money. So it's the same logic for a lot of the programs that we love and cherish and that enrich our lives. So we will try and use this day to highlight those programs, and of course we will continue to put pressure on MPs, to put pressure on the new Culture Secretary, who of course is as anti-work as you can find in the Conservative Party. It's going to be difficult, but I think we can win. This is actually a campaign I believe we can win, and when we win it, as my friend Jeremy said earlier, it's not actually my friend, but now that I've said it, I guess we have to be friends. As my friend Jeremy said earlier, if we fight with people, when we win, we have more credibility, so we can actually ask them to do other things with us, right? And I think this is one campaign that people care about a great deal, and if we win it, there is a great deal of momentum against the people who want to destroy public service broadcasting. Thank you so much, everyone.
Please make sure you support that campaign, and what an important message, I think, to leave us all with. Good will not always happen unless you fight for it. I think that'll stick with me this evening, so thank you. Our next speaker, I mean, is actually a hero of mine in terms of journalism. You know, as a younger black male, if it wasn't for Gary Younge in the media writing about things that was going on, I think it would have seemed much darker than it is. But Gary Younge.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, first of all, I want to echo what John Bosco and Maxine said, that we, on the left, we rightly dream that a better world is possible. But while we're dreaming that, we also have to recognise that a worse world is possible. And because a worse world is possible, we have to defend sometimes the imperfect. And the BBC and Channel 4, they are imperfect. They are sometimes worse than imperfect. But it could be worse. And so we have to be strategic about how we fight our struggles. Now, I'm just going to give a couple of brief examples of what it was like on the inside, being a journalist. And two stories that stand out. The first was the first by-election that was fought while Jeremy was leader, which I think was in Oldham. And it was said in my company at a meeting, in my personal company, not in my actual company, I don't have one of those, that, you know, well, if he loses, it's curtains for Corbyn. Actually, if the vote goes down, it's curtains for Corbyn. And I said, what if the vote goes up? And they said, well, nobody is saying that. And I said, well, I just said it. What if the vote goes up? It hasn't happened yet. And this was dismissed. And then the by-election happened. And the Mirror, in its first edition, before the vote had been counted, said a night of woe for Jeremy Corbyn. And then the votes came in, and the vote share had gone up, and the majority had gone up. And then they said, well, he's a good local candidate. That's why. It's got nothing to do with Jeremy Corbyn. And I said, so then Jeremy Corbyn is a witch from the 18th century, and if he drowns, he's not a witch, and if he floats, then he's a witch, and we burn him anyway. There is no way for this person to win in the framework that you have set out. He will always be bad. The other one was in the run-up to the 2017 election, when hundreds of people, maybe more, were gathering in certain places and shouting Jeremy's name, and he would show up, and lots of enthusiastic crowds would gather. And I said, I'm not saying that this means that Labour will win. I don't know if these people will vote. I don't know who they are. I don't know what's going on. But it's interesting, isn't it? And it behoves us as a news organisation to find out what is going on. Actually, exactly the same things that I said about covering the Trump election. It's no good just dismissing these people as being ridiculous. We have to find out who they are and what they want. That's our job. That is our job. Not to predict the outcome, but to describe the world that we live in. And one of the things that really did stun me, it didn't stun me that the papers would be hostile to a left leader of the Labour Party. That didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was the chronic lack of curiosity. The absolute, the abject failure of the basic principles of journalism to go there, find out what happened, and then tell people the truth. That's the thing that they kind of almost couldn't do. And there's a reason for that. Actually, there's a few reasons for that. But one of the things that's, I think, important to understand in this is that it's much more sinister than anybody telling you not to write something. Of course, that does happen, but actually, it's so much more sinister than that because they don't have to tell you what to write or what not to write. You know what will be accepted or won't be accepted. It's the Steve Biko phrase, there is nothing as powerful in the hands of the oppressor than the mind of the oppressed. And so they don't need... There were no orders, or you know what, I'm sure there were at some organisations, but there didn't need to be any orders to trash Jeremy because it was known, it was understood. And you have to understand, when it comes to newspaper columnists, there's a higher percentage of newspaper columnists who went to private school in Oxbridge than there are people who went to private school in Oxbridge that are in the Lords, in the House of Lords. That's how elitist that profession is. So if you have someone who is arguing about austerity, about cuts on the poor, about housing and the challenges of housing, about people who are on free school meals, about kind of internet poverty, these people have no experience of any of that. They operate in this fetid ecosystem where they talk to each other. The people who are running the country and the people who are covering the people who are running the country are effectively the same person. And that is the state of the crisis that we're in when it comes to journalism. Now, just two more very brief points. The first is that even as I was going to say profits are going up, but actually kind of that whole industry is in crisis precisely because of the internet. But their credibility is going down. And their credibility is going down precisely because of things like the 2017 election, where pretty much the entire media went one way and the British public went in the opposite direction, which proved that they were not as powerful as they thought they were. But then they came back, reinforced with extra vigour, this time taking Jeremy seriously and therefore taking themselves more seriously, and were far more effective. Effective, but not credible. That the credibility of the British news media keeps on going down. But the other thing that is important to understand, as someone who was on the inside looking out for the most part, is that you are much more powerful than is given credit for. That you, people, change the debate. And so even as they try to frame the conversation in these warped and weird ways and to shift our understanding of things in these warped and weird ways and to encourage people to act against their own self-interest, in that, they are losing. They are losing because you are far more powerful than, or many people are far more powerful than they understand. And that's where I, as a journalist, as was, and an academic now, find my hope that the newspapers, as powerful as they are, they can't tell you what to think. They can't tell you the world that you must imagine. They can't dictate the kind of the borders of your hope. And they failed time and time again. That's why we're still here. That they have failed time and time again, which doesn't mean that we've won, but it also means that there is everything to fight for. And if you don't fight, you can't win. Thank you.
Absolutely, Gary. If you don't fight, you don't win. I remember that 2017 election. You know, I was a teacher in the northeast of England, just outside Newcastle, and my school caretaker, who'd never voted for Jeremy Corbyn for the first time. His partner, my teaching assistant, also had never voted before, voted for Jeremy Corbyn for the first time. You know, you inspired so many people, Jeremy, and it's a real privilege to have you here. So, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. And Gary and I had a very good discussion before this panel came on. So I know there's been some audience churn since then, but somebody would have heard a lot of what we said before. So what I want to do is just very briefly reflect on some of the points that have been made and then move on to what we can actually do about it, because that has to be what we do next and how we go forward. I think the issue of news values and challenging and disempowering of people is what Gary was talking about, and what Maxine was saying about the way in which dramas are presented, particularly on BBC, but others. I mean, how many young people have been brought up thinking the sort of Jolly Japes history of Britain from 1910 to 1960 was sort of somewhere around Downton Abbey, and it was all Jolly Japes of what was going on upstairs, and they were having big dinners together, and they hardly mentioned the downstairs dozens and dozens of people in appalling conditions working very hard for damn all money. And how often do people grow up thinking the history of the British in India wasn't the oppression, wasn't the theft of riches from India. It was actually the Raj, and it was the luxuries that went with it. It was the Maharajas, and it was sort of the British ruling class driving around in Rolls Royces, waving at the happy natives who were sort of saying, "Oh, lovely to see you here. We're so glad you're here. It's not somebody else." What does that image have? What effect does that image have on young people who are perhaps not very closely studying history of what the effects of empire actually were? It took a very long time before any media in this country started seriously discussing the slave trade, slavery, and the effects of it, until Roots came along quite a while ago. That was one of an early program on it. And so the cultural effect of the way in which drama is presented is absolutely massive. And never underestimate that people's view of history becomes some sort of fairly banal costume drama on television, and they think, well, that's the history of Jamaica, that's the history of Ghana, or whatever else. And so I do think we should recognise the great value of wonderful filmmakers like Ken Loach, not so much for his not just for his more recent stuff, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He's a good friend of mine, but also his stuff he did as a young man, a program called Z-Cars, which presented policing in working class communities, not in the Dixon of Dock Green model of the perfect cop looking after the community, but with these sort of fairly dodgy characters in the community and pretty dodgy characters in the police force as well. And it was all sort of gritty, real time. And some of it was very funny, but it was real. And also he made, to me, an absolutely iconic and brilliant film called Cathy Come Home, which explained what homelessness was really like in modern Britain, at the same time as the narrative was, you've never had it so good, and anybody on benefits was probably scrounging them anyway, and if you got a council house, you probably fiddled it and didn't need it. And he challenged all of that. So never underestimate the ability of good quality history, films, and so on, to challenge so much of that. And that is why I think that we have to, as I said earlier, look a lot at the news values on the way in which events around the world are reported. I mean, you get a flood in the USA. I'm sorry, I'm sad, I feel for the people that have been flooded. I hope they're being helped. I hope there's an efficiency in dealing with it. Likewise, I'm equally sorry for the people in Germany that suffered those horrific floods and the support and help they get. When the massive flood happened between Zambia, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and it was 3 or 4 weeks before some communities were even reached with any kind of help or assistance, where was our media in reporting that? In fact, most people didn't even know there was a flood in Mozambique at that time. And it's that sort of global news values that we have to look at. And so that's why, through the Project for Justice and Peace, we've been setting up news clubs around the country. And I've been to quite a few of the inaugural meetings of this. Thomas Barlow, who's been inspiring them and setting them up, is here tonight. And it's fascinating. You bring a group of people together in their community, discuss independent media, discuss what's happening on the news, discuss how to challenge it, and discuss how to mobilize people through these news clubs. And we're setting these up on a bigger basis all over the country, because I think it's bringing people together to empower them of what an alternative media can look like. Empower them where there are strong independent papers. I'm thinking of papers like the West Highland Free Press, like papers in Bristol, like the Camden New Journal, and a number of others around the country. They've been very effective as genuinely independent local newspapers, whilst at the same time, most other local newspapers have been bought over by major corporations who actually control them, asset strip them, get rid of most of the journalists, print press releases and advertising, and very little else. It's the destruction of local media. You think about it, local media, local news, local reporting, local Facebook, etc. groups are actually very important as a glue of community. So I do think those things have to be included in everything we do. 2 other points I want to make. One is, which I said earlier in the discussion that Gary and I had, about the power of the social media giants, of Google, of Facebook, and all the bits that go with it. Their power is absolutely phenomenal, and the use of algorithms as to how you get directed to information, directed to news, directed to values is extraordinary. Now, it's not a secret what my age is. I'm of a certain age. Yeah? Okay, I won't tell you what it is, because I want you to research it yourselves. But I just say this. It's a bit odd. When I turn on my phone in most parts of the country, I'm directed towards the local undertakers and the low-price funerals that take place in those areas. Is everybody over 70 directed towards a funeral parlour as a way of sort of buying an insurance against your family having to pay for your funeral or something like that? Now, it's not very nice, to be quite honest, and I actually take it quite personally, it's quite offensive. But look at it another way, the way in which algorithms can be and are used politically. Look at the way the Trump campaign used them in the election in the USA. And Gary did some brilliant reporting, not just on Trump and the Trump supporters, and he asked the questions as to what was motivating them and the way in which social media can be deeply corrupted in order to send people in particular directions. It can promote racism, it can promote inequality, it can promote all kinds of things that are pretty horrible. So we've got to look at the levels of regulation and what we believe to be our freedom to communicate with each other, which is actually not quite as free as it might appear all the time. And so, to me, those things are important. defending the public ownership of Channel 4. Very interesting. The Tory party have always flirted with the idea of privatising Channel 4, and indeed there have been some people in the Labour Party that have also said the same occasionally. There are a lot of people who don't realise that Channel 4 is actually publicly owned and has a charter behind it. But when Channel 4 invited each party to take part in the environment debate just before the 2019 election, I accepted, Liberal Democrats accepted, SNP and Plaid Cymru accepted, Green Party pretty obviously accepted, the Tory Party and UKIP refused, and so they assumed by their refusal it wouldn't happen, and Channel 4 had gone into debate with everybody about the date of it. They checked very carefully what party leaders had engagements that evening, because it's pretty well known during an election campaign, and they worked out the appropriate evening it could take place. And then, just before it happened, I mean a few days before, those two parties decided they wouldn't take part and assumed it wouldn't go ahead. And so they were replaced with blocks of melting ice instead, and the debate duly went ahead. At that point, the Tory party went into hyperdrive about the need to privatise Channel 4 because of the perceived embarrassment to Boris Johnson. I'd have been very happy to debate the environment with Boris Johnson, debate it with anybody. And so I think fair play to Channel 4 for going ahead with it on that occasion, on that day. And the last thing is on the BBC. Now, you're speaking here to somebody who gets constantly irritated beyond belief and annoyed beyond belief with the BBC. And the thing I find most lovely and endearing about the BBC is when the news comes on, the news presenter decides the most important person to interview about a news story that's there is the BBC expert on that subject, and then to add to the flavour of it, the BBC expert on the subject then brings in a BBC reporter to give us the flavour of the events going on the ground. At no point does any member of the public get involved at all. It is solely a BBC thing, and the BBC loves nothing more than history programmes about the history of the BBC. But, and I say this as a big but, it is a public service broadcast. It is supposed to educate and entertain and inform. That is what the Charter said. There's never been a more politically directed and motivated government than Theresa May, well, Cameron, May and Johnson, far more so than even Thatcher or previous Tory Prime Ministers in controlling, influencing and trying to push the BBC in a particular direction. And so I work with the NUJ and others in trying to make sure we do have a genuine public service broadcasting. Because if we lose it in the way the US lost public service broadcasting, and essentially the basis of news in the USA is Fox News and the values that go with Fox News, that is where we're heading. So it's up to us to defend those bits we've got that are genuinely independent, but above all, to promote an independent media and provide platforms for each other. So when Double Down News, when Byline, whatever else, have got something interesting going on, film of an event or something like that, share it so we can all follow it. That way, that ability to communicate with each other will grow, and the strength of our campaign against the economic orthodoxy of poverty, inequality, austerity, privatisation, all that economic orthodoxy, which is redistributing power and wealth in the wrong direction, can be challenged. But it's not going to happen unless we think seriously about this. And the idea of these news clubs is to bring people together to creatively develop those alternative sources. And I hope you will join in them and make sure they're successful. Thank you.
So, before we close this evening, I just want to make you aware of the next event that we do have going on. At the back, there are some candles being put out, and on the back table, there will be a vigil, a procession down to the Midland Hotel, where the Tories are in there drinking, living to the excess. But we want to go down there as a vigil to mark the 130,000 who've died due to COVID-19, their mishandling of a crisis, their failures. So please make sure that you get involved with Peace and Justice Project, involved with the news clubs. Please, let's collectivise, let's take control, let's get democracy in our media, but not just in our media, in our communities and workplaces. A huge, huge thank you to Maxine, to John Bosco, to Gary, to Emma, and to Jeremy Corbyn. So thank you all.